She's my daughter.
I said I want the truth.
She's my sister. She's my daughter. My sister, my daughter.
I said I want the truth.
She's my sister and my daughter.
Hi, this is Dan. Today, as we continue our discussion on creating great characters, I want to take a moment to memorialize Robert Towne. Robert Towne was one of Hollywood's greatest writers. In fact, if you ask many people, at least for the Hollywood side of the entertainment industry, who are the greatest writers who have ever worked in Hollywood, he always makes the top 5. We will, in fact, look at some of the other writers over time to discuss why they were as special as they were. The beauty of Robert Towne is that he was always a populist. He started with characters who came from nothing and who usually made themselves. Now, in the process of making themselves, they would encounter all sorts of moral challenges. And in many instances, we get to look at them as potentially anti-heroes rather than heroes. But nonetheless, he believed in making everybody worthy of our attention. Most surprisingly, and this is true in 3 of the cornerstone movies we're going to talk about today, he emphasized the importance of backstory. And ironically, that is what the next topic I was going to talk about was. What is the backstory of your character? The backstory is everything that happened to them, everyone they've ever met, every book they've ever read, every event they've ever taken, everything about their friends and their relatives that they've ever heard of and have used either positively or negatively in their lives. That is backstory. And Robert Towne was a master of coming up with characters who were haunted by their backstories and who would try their best to make up for whatever terrible thing had happened in their past. And in the process of that, you would end up with some of the great tragedies that were ever put on film. And what became even more ironic is if you look especially at certain of his key works, you'll see that in the attempt for often the male characters, and in this case, all of them, to address their pasts, what they end up doing is victimizing the female characters. And what makes it even more fascinating is the female characters are willing participants because of their own backstories, because of their own issues, that they are seeking their own redemption through these men who are more often than not catalysts to their doom. The first of the movies we're going to look at is The Tomb of Liegia. The Tomb of Liegia is one of Robert Towne's first movies. It was part of the Edgar Allan Poe series of movies that were made by Roger Corman, usually featuring Vincent Price. And these were among the major motion pictures in the low-budget arena, in the drive-in circuit, that would break into the mainstream and eventually become massive cult classics. If anything, Corman is as much remembered for Little Shop of Horrors and some of his other very low-budget films, as well as being the catalyst for so many young filmmakers to eventually make their later movies. Ron Howard, Eat My Dust. Martin Scorsese, Boxcar Bertha. Jonathan Demme, Crazy Mama. As well as bringing in a lot of major talent that would become role modeling for the future, such as Pam Grier in her quote-unquote blaxploitation films, but nonetheless movies that pass the test of time remarkably today in terms of showing strong females. Now let's look at Tomb of Liegia. Liegia was the last of the movies that Corman wanted to do for the Edgar Allan Poe series. And in the process of doing that, he, for the first time, used real life locations. A wonderful desecrated abbey that forms the residence of Vernon Fell. And Vernon Fell, played by Vincent Price, is a man who is haunted continually by demons of the past. The demons of the past include the history of his family, the history of the wealth that they themselves had done their best to squander. And that had reached its ultimate point when he had married Liegia. Liegia, who was the embodiment of evil, who was the embodiment of manipulation, who had controlled Vernon's mind. But she had been felled by her own body's frailties, and she had died. But she had let Vernon know that mere death was not going to give him respite. He was not going to be able to escape her malevolent personality, and that she would eventually continue to haunt him. So Vernon's backstory is very much, how can I get away not only from my family's past, but Liegia? Into his life comes the Lady Rowena, played by Elizabeth Shepard. She does a fantastic commentary on the DVD of this, by the way. It's very worth listening to, because she had real presence of understanding who her character was. Independent, someone who comes from wealth, someone who doesn't need Vernon's money, so can therefore be someone who is loving to him and can try to help him solve his path. See, she's going to take a little bit of agency in it. She meets him in what can only be termed as a typical Hollywood meet cute. They're chasing after a fox. She falls off her horse. Vernon's there. Next thing you know, they're getting married. Her former boyfriend's upset about it, etc., etc. But once they get married, she finds herself locked up in his enormous palace, decaying as it is, trying to figure out what she can do next to bring her husband around to the man she thought she married. But rather than solving that, it becomes a battle of wills between the former persona of Liegia, Vernon's increasing realization that he's not going to be able to protect her, and her own desire to use her own strength to try to save him. Well, the whole thing basically ends in a disaster, with Vernon losing his mind, with Rowena feeling like her personality is being usurped by Liegia. At one point, she looks at her red hair. She's redheaded. She looks at her comb, and it's got black hairs in it like Liegia. In the middle of one of Corman's great fires, which end so many of his movies, you have Liegia coming back and Vernon seeing Elizabeth as Liegia. So you actually have a confusion of identities, resulting in ultimate doom. She's going to survive, although really technically she probably wouldn't have, except Corman kind of wanted a happy ending, so she ends up with her boring guy. So, but it ends in total destruction. It ends in a very negative space. And that's another part of Towne, that he was great at coming up with negative spaces. The next movie we're going to discuss is actually one of the greatest movies, not just of the 70s, not just of American cinema, but of all time. And that movie is Chinatown. And it's worth saying that one of the challenges with facing Chinatown today is that when it was first released, it was considered a major box office disappointment. And that's probably because it was coming in on the coattails of another Paramount movie that would go on to be epoch-making, and that was The Godfather Part 2. So given the competition between two of the greatest films of all time the same year, with kind of the same sense of despair and loss, is it any wonder that audiences probably felt, you know what, I'd rather see The Great Gatsby. as kind of an antidote to the just depressive air that seemed to be permeating everything. But when we look at Chinatown, the main character in that is Jake Geddes. Jake Geddes is a detective, and he has been reduced to being someone who basically follows around couples who are having adulterous relationships and takes pictures. And he's kind of arrogant in his sleaziness. He's very happy to be able to be making the money. The story itself, the inciting incident of this one, starts when Evelyn Mulwray comes to visit him. She wants him to follow her husband and take pictures of him. What we're going to learn later is this is not the real Evelyn Mulwray. The real Evelyn Mulwray is Faye Dunaway, a woman who is aloof, is very much a film noir heroine, someone who has deep wells of despair within her. And she is at first haughty towards Jake, but she gets to open up to him, whether it's all an actor or whether she's real, is one of the ambiguities of the film. I'm going to say that she's actually real about him. And for the first time, Jake, who used to be part of the LAPD, and he left following a terrible incident that had happened in Chinatown where someone he had vowed to protect ended up dead anyway. That had put him in despair. That is why he chose to just take pictures of adulterous couples, because then he didn't have to be emotionally, morally, spiritually involved in being the good guy. Well, now he's seeing this case as something that will give him the chance at that redemption, because it turns out that among the very wealthy, there's also a lot of scandals. Evelyn's husband, who had been in charge of a dam project that had failed very much, the Mulholland story, had and had now been killed. Now there's a murder case. Now Jake, inadvertently at first, has gotten involved with it. Then the woman who had first come to him saying that she's Evelyn Mulwray turns out to have been a phony. She's now dead too. So that he'd also gotten pictures while he was working for her of an old man who was talking to her late husband. And that old man turns out to be her father. And as Jake Geddes continues his investigation, he starts to find out just how terrible that old man is. He is someone who wants to control the water supply into Los Angeles. And the way that they plan to do it is by starving out farmers, by refusing to let them have water, meanwhile doing runoff at night and dumping all of the water. Secondly, by incorporating the San Fernando Valley, which is a way to bring the water from outside into the city. But the easiest way in is through Owens Mount. And so he wants to control Owens Mount and therefore the San Fernando Valley. And the way he does it is to have the San Fernando Valley, instead of being a separate city, become part of Los Angeles. Therefore, Los Angeles can pull the water out of the valley. And they are able to take over the land for cheap because they're starving it of water. So this is a bad guy. And then as the movie advances, we get to see how much worse of a guy he is. He is someone who turns out that the girl that they had seen, the old man played by John Huston, the person they'd seen with him, the younger girl, is actually his granddaughter. And in a shocking revelation later, we learn that the granddaughter is actually also his daughter, that he had raped his daughter. Faye Dunaway, he had raped her. No wonder she feels powerless around men. No wonder she doesn't have any kind of romantic feelings, why she feels that she is, in fact, flawed. And we see that played out in her trying to protect her daughter, whom she knows her father is going to molest. At the end of the movie, hey, this thing is 50 years old. Sorry, there are no spoilers. At the end of the movie, Jake is once again forced to return to Chinatown. And when he does, what ends up happening is that Evelyn tries to save her daughter from the father. She tells Jake it's no use. He owns the police. He owns everyone. There's no way to stop him. She tries to escape. She ends up getting shot by a cop and killed. And what happens then? The grandfather embraces his granddaughter, knowing he has won everything. So we see a complete validation of evil, again, and a Robert Towne unhappy ending. And we also have a bit of a conundrum, because Roman Polanski insisted on having that unhappy ending. As someone who lived through the Holocaust, saw his family murdered, and then 5 years before this movie had his wife and some of his best friends murdered at his house while he was out of the country, Roman Polanski did not like Robert Towne's original ending, which was a happy ending. The end of it, yeah, Noah's gotten all his power and all of that, but Jake and Evelyn are going to run away together and live happily ever after. Polanski said no. And when interviewed at one point, when they said, "You really have a negative view of life, don't you?" he was quoted as saying, "I don't see any reason not to." And given his past, and given the fact that very soon after this, he would be bounced out of the country over an alleged rape of a 13-year-old, which, gonna say this, yeah, I completely believe he did it. I completely also believe he always knew that she was underage. God knows the other women in Polanski's life have always been very young. Natasha Kinski, Emmanuel Senior, they all started hanging with Polanski at very young ages. And I'm going to say something else. This is not uncommon in Hollywood. This is Hollywood's bête noire. So much of the casting couch was based on girls who were, by today's standards, underage. It was just a part of the town, just like Noah, John Huston, just being corrupt and winning anyway. The last movie we're only going to talk about briefly, and that is Shampoo. Shampoo was a massive hit in 1975, firmly re-establishing that Warren Beatty was a force to be reckoned with. It's all about a male hairdresser on the eve of the 1968 DNC convention. And during the process of that day, he interacts with a whole bunch of different people, bankers, his clients, the owner of the shop that he's working at, and the mistress that he has, his girlfriend that he also has on the side, who has an opportunity to have a major career step forward, but she's going to choose to remain with him instead. And it's all about how he maneuvers between these different people, former lovers, including who will still see him in the present, the person who might be willing to finance him, being married to two women that Warren Beatty is sleeping with. It's all about his chaotic existence. And in every instance in that, you have men who are riddled with their own backstories of having come from nothing, having been failures, and now having been willing to embrace any kind of corruption. And once again, the women are the vessels in which these men try to find balance. And in the process of that, they all end up severely harmed. You have Lee Grant, 50-year-old woman he's having an affair with. Doesn't really love her, but he's using her politically. She knows it. See him dealing with Julie Christie, a former love. She's now having an affair with this rich guy that she can help him get money from. And you have Goldie Hawn as his long-suffering girlfriend who is choosing to put her own needs aside for whatever happened in her past in order to make him feel more of a man, as if he didn't need it. And at the end of it, he seems to have lost it all. And you see him on the top of one of the hills overlooking Los Angeles, seeing the desolation that represents his life, seeing the woman that he truly loves, Julie Christie, going off with Jack Warden. So you're seeing him at a point where he made a play, didn't quite work out, but he's going to go on, very much a 1970s film of being a drifter, of the Vietnam War has ended, Nixon has resigned, country looks like it's just an unbelievable disaster, and whatever his ambitions are, maybe they'll happen, maybe they won't. Yeah, he's really talented as a hairdresser, but he's much more talented as a coxman. So we're seeing him have that existential angst. The reason I don't give Shampoo more time is I have found that students today cannot tolerate it. The lack of a dramatic through line, the corkscrew nature of the different people's relationships and why they're doing what they're doing to each other is so selfish, so unconnected to any kind of humanity that audiences understandably find it easier to reject. I still think Shampoo is worth seeing, but the bottom line is, toward the end of his career, Robert Towne, just like Carrie Fisher, found himself faced with another truly Mephistophelian deal. And that is that you can either kill yourself trying to write The Next Last Detail, another one of his great movies, full of deep characters, important moral situations, and really moving the art forward, or to take $250,000 for a week's worth of work rewriting dialogue for some egomaniacal star. Harry Fisher took that deal. So did Robert Towne. That's why he really hadn't been all that active for pretty much the past 15 years. He'd done a lot of work. And yeah, he had health problems too. Don't forget that. But when you can get paid a quarter of what you'd probably make for a script that took the lifeblood out of you, or just writing a few lines and getting a nice big check, took the nice big check. Do I think that's bad? No, he did what he had to do. This town is very cruel to true artists, to iconoclasts. And remember, his greatest film, Chinatown, was one that didn't make money on its initial release. Therefore, the town considered it a failure. So even though it's now one of the great classics, even though now, hopefully, development execs still quote it the way they did when I was doing all that. So the bottom line is, Robert Towne is well worth looking at if you want to be a writer. And it's especially important to see how he would delve with the concept of backstory and what made him unique among writers, just like he did in these three films, is that he took the backstory of the male, used the male trying to fix that as a way to explore a woman whose own backstory is potentially much worse. And she's going to be used by someone who is also broken. That was his genius.
Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.